Hello. Sorry for the late start. We're experiencing some technical difficulties, and that might be continuing because the technical difficulties is that Marie has not been able to hear me. So I'm just taking us live. If you can hear me, will you please let me know? If you can't hear me, will you please let me know? That will help us narrow down some stuff. Marie, can you hear me now? Marie, hello. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
All
Great.
right. We got
All
to figure
right.
out whatever it was. Apologies for the late start. Here we are.
Hello. Welcome, everybody. Yes, apologies. Nice to see you, Brandon. Welcome, anyone who's watching, to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. As the title says, this is not therapy. It's just an open conversation, questions of Brandon. And I will put some questions to Brandon today on behalf of some of our social media followers and viewers. And if you have any questions, please feel free to join us in the chat wherever you're watching from, be it Facebook, Twitch, or YouTube. If you post a message in the chat, it will appear here for us, and we can answer your questions. So a little bit of housekeeping. My name's Marie. I'm an executive functioning coach with Effective Artistry, and I'm joined as ever by Brandon Tessers, Director of Effective Artistry at LCPC. Effective Artistry is a therapy and coaching practice based in Northbrook, Illinois, US. And so for therapy, therapists with Effective Artistry can work with anyone anywhere in the state of Illinois. And our coaches can work with people all around the world, provided you have an internet connection. I think that's everything. But if I've forgotten anything, please let me know, Brandon.
I was looking at other things. I assume you got everything.
All right. Okay. I think so. You can find us on lots of social media channels, and the website address is effectiveartistry.com. We're also on TikTok. Margaret Schaus is the therapist who maintains the TikTok account, and you can contact Margaret directly there and ask questions or leave comments. Tell us what you're thinking about, what you'd like to talk about, or what you'd like to hear us talk about. And we're here every Monday at 1 p.m. Central Time. So we do have a topic for today, Brandon. It's one that comes up a lot. It's one I have struggled with and still struggle with myself, and that topic is imposter syndrome. So I suppose the thing I always come away with at the end of our talks on Monday is that language is a big part of how we deal with these things, and how we interpret these phrases can be different from person to person, and so it's important to get the language right, I guess, and make sure we're communicating clearly with one another. So I'll start, as always, with the basic question: what is imposter syndrome?
Yeah, good question. And I'm glad. I like that we get to talk language because, yeah, it matters. Not so much necessarily in the sense of like correct or incorrect, right or wrong, just in if I'm going to use a phrase, I want people to know what I mean by that phrase because otherwise they're going to interpret it the way that they interpret it. And if other people use that phrase to mean different things validly, then the message gets lost. Because I think kind of like something we're going to be talking about throughout this stream today is that there just isn't like a right and a wrong answer, generally speaking. It puts a high bar on you if you feel like if I've got to say, oh, I can only discuss something if I am correct about it.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to discuss much at all because how am I going like there's no way to be correct, right? So anyway, imposter syndrome, it's one of those phrases. It's very evocative and very useful. I love that in the chat right there. I struggled with whether I have imposter syndrome or not, which might be an indication. So for sure, yeah, you feel like an imposter syndrome. But also, as with a lot of this stuff we're talking about, it's not a thing that you have or don't have. It's a phrase that we have developed to be able to communicate about some set of experiences, some pattern of feelings or behaviors or thoughts, and it's useful. It's not a diagnosable thing, and even if you've been here before, like even things that are diagnosable are still a diagnosis is loosely related to whatever thing a person might be experiencing. This is not that.
The word syndrome kind of medicalizes it a bit. Sorry.
No, absolutely. That's why. Well, okay, a bit of a side tangent here at the beginning, just because this is important. Syndrome, disorder, and disease are three different things. They're like actually qualitatively, like they have different qualifications to be called a disease versus a disorder versus a syndrome. And most people don't know that, including me, until within the last year or two, right? So that just means that we kind of lump it all together and it all means the same thing. Disorder, syndrome, disease is all the same, and we just think of them the same. They are not. A disease, in order for something to be a disease, we have to be able to observe the mechanical function of the disease. We have to be able to see a virus go into a cell and do some stuff.
Right.
Kind of a brief, pithy way of saying it is that for something to be a disease, it has to be something we can observe on the autopsy table. It has to be something that happens in a human body that doesn't really, doesn't necessitate that human be in a particular context, or et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
A syndrome is closer to disease than disorder generally. Syndrome means a collection of symptoms that we find together frequently, but have not been able to explain any mechanism behind it. So a lot of the things that are called syndrome in the medical sense, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, for example, Marfan syndrome, they're relatively predictable in terms of like what comes out. But even then, right, it's like if you have Marfan syndrome, you may have this thing that is often a part of Marfan syndrome, or you may not. It may play out in different ways. So syndromes are based on the observation of symptoms. And if you have certain symptoms in common appear a bunch, we say, we don't know what it is, but it's useful to label it. And then in like the medical establishment or whatever, a lot of that is led to genetics research, because when we associate a certain gene expression with a certain syndrome, that doesn't still tell us the genes don't cause the syndrome. They're just correlated with the syndrome.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then disorder just means we're saying this is orderly behavior. This is what we would expect someone to think, feel, or do. And anything outside of that is disordered behavior or feeling or cognition. And if you have certain patterns, certain types of disordered behavior, then we're going to call it whatever the disorder is named, depressive disorder, right? This is why with disorders, like everyone gets sad. Yes, everyone does. But not everyone has depression. Yeah, because depression is a disorder that we have labeled as you must meet certain diagnostic criteria. But even in that criteria, it's still blah, blah, blah. We talk about that stuff all the time. So in terms of imposter syndrome, it's not a thing. It's just a turn of phrase. It's kind of like saying, something that's very similar would be like rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is also not a diagnosable or medical thing. But something in a bit of a different vein, just to kind of make the point, would be like saying that you're shy. Saying I have imposter syndrome is like saying I'm shy. It's a way of communicating to others about my experience in some way that isn't like identifiably correct or incorrect.
Yeah, so it's not an observable pattern of behavior. It's more about your internal experience.
Right. And if you ever feel like you're an imposter, then you can say you have imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
There's no criteria to define it one way or the other. So that takes us to your initial question, which is, what do we mean when we say imposter syndrome? Sorry, I had to drink some water. My tea's still too hot. And it depends on the person using it. But generally what we mean is a person who says that they have imposter syndrome generally means I feel as though there's something that I should be able to do that I can't, and that other people expect me to be able to do, but that I can't. Sometimes people will say imposter syndrome when what they mean is, I think everybody can do this except for me. Like a common version of that would be people saying, like, I don't feel like I'm an adult, right? Other adults do something, know something that I don't. So everyone's treating me like an adult, but I'm not. I'm an imposter. But of course, more specific things, you get hired for a role and you're working at a job in a company or whatever, and everyone expects you to be able to do the things that they expect someone in that role to be able to do, and you feel like you can't. You say you have an imposter syndrome. Or, and notably, it doesn't really matter whether you actually accomplish those things or not.
Yes.
Oftentimes people who say I have imposter syndrome, they're doing all the things that everybody's expecting them to be able to do, but they think that it's harder for them than it should be, for example. Or I know it always works out, but I never know how, so I don't know that the next time will work out. I'm always worried that tomorrow is going to be the day that everyone finds out I can't actually do this, or etc.
Yeah. Yeah. The feeling like, oh, I just got by on luck, and someday somebody's going to find out that I'm a complete fraud.
Yeah. So it just means I think I'm in a position where I should be doing or feeling or thinking something that I'm not.
Right.
In some kind of deficient way, right? Like I feel less than I should be. Often, but not always, with the addition that other people have reason to expect me, or I believe that other people have reason to expect me to be able to do X, Y, or Z, even though I don't think I can.
Yeah. So one of the questions here is, why does that happen? Why is it that I feel that everyone around me has it together when I don't? That's a big question.
It is. And kind of a generic, what do we mean by everyone has it together? Which that actually is probably part of the answer, at least sometimes when people are asking it this way. The fact that they're asking it that way is part of the answer to the question. But let's address it more, break it down a little bit. The one thing we can say is you have a concept of yourself, and you have a concept of what someone in your position should be, and that those two concepts are different from each other. There is something that you feel as though you are supposed to be able to do, supposed to be able to do at a certain level of difficulty or frequency or predictability, and you can't, or you're worried that you can't. So, as always, we want to look at both of those things. Sometimes you are accurately assessing what it is that you are doing or capable of, and et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes you are accurately assessing what someone in your role is expected to be, and there is actually a difference there that might result in you feeling imposter syndrome. Sometimes you're assessing this accurately, who you are, but assessing the what it is that you're supposed to be doing inaccurately. In the case of adulting, for example, I would say it's almost always that people have a mistaken idea of what an adult is supposed to be, that what they are actually is an adult. They just have some other idea of it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's that you are accurately assessing what somebody should be capable of doing in a position that you're in or whatever, but you're misidentifying what you are capable of doing. That would cover cases where it's like you do actually do your job and everyone says you do your job really well, but you still feel like you're terrible at it. Now, the more general you get, and that's what I meant by the language in this question, right? And having it all together. What do you mean having it all together? Because what's likely to happen, right, if it's that general and that vague, is that I look at a person who's my age and they're in much better shape than I'm in. I say, see, they have it all together, with no knowledge or paying attention to the fact that their professional life is in shambles compared to mine. And then I look at somebody else my age whose professional life is in much better shape than mine is, and say, see, without looking at the fact that their personal relationships are worse than mine, or et cetera, et cetera. Meaning you're just comparing yourself. If it's that general, you're comparing things in a general way. You can pick anything about either person and compare those things together. And because of the way the brain works and cognitive miser, all that stuff we talk about, when you do that, you're generally going to come up on the downside. You're not often going to be looking at other people and being like, wow, I'm way better at X, Y, or Z than them. And when you do, you might feel bad about it and then discount it. Oh, I'm so arrogant, or whatever.
Can you talk a little bit more about the brain being a cognitive miser?
So cognitive miser theory is just a way of describing the idea that the brain is operating with finite resources and therefore allocates those resources as best it is able, meaning the brain doesn't spend resources unless it has a reason to do so. We're prioritizing things. We're trying to allocate the minimal amount of resources necessary to a thing in order to interact with it in whatever way we're trying to interact with it, etc. So resources are finite. And one of the things that results in is we're going to notice stuff that causes problems, a lot more than we notice stuff that is nice.
Yeah. Like I go into work sometimes and I see some of my colleagues who are really well dressed and put together and their hair looks great. And I feel like I've just crawled out of bed and been dragged through a hedge. And I think, well, they've got really busy lives and you know, they've got kids and stuff. What's my excuse? I mustn't be adulting properly.
Sure. And if and when during that time anybody ever said to you something along the lines of like, wow, you're so put together, then it's quite possible that you just dismiss that as, oh, they're lying to me to be nice.
Yeah.
Or,
Immediately, if I get a compliment, oh, nice outfit, or I like your hair today, I'll go, oh God, it must look awful on all the other days.
yeah. Or if you believe them, you might think, well, they don't know how hard it was for me to get myself put together. Meaning you're assuming that everybody else puts themselves together much more easily than you do.
Yeah.
It's safer,
Mhm.
right? If you're looking at something, you know, like let's make it real physical and evolutionary past. If you see a shape that's kind of shadowy and whatever, and it could be an innocuous bush, and it also could be a predator. Well, anybody who's like, oh, that's probably a bush when it's really a predator, they got eaten by the predator and didn't pass on their genes. Anybody who was like, that's probably a predator when it was actually a bush, didn't get eaten by the bush, right? Like, so if something could be neutral or even beneficial, but could also be negative, we're incentivized and programmed to see it as the negative thing. Better safe than sorry. We have a saying for this, right? Like when someone goes like this to you, you flinch, you don't think like, well, usually when my friend does that to me, I don't actually get hit, and therefore you react in the safest possible way.
Yeah.
So this is a version of that. Well, they might be lying. They might be telling the truth. If they're lying, that would mean that people are perceiving me not only that I'm not put together, but also that I'm fragile or needy and therefore need to be lied to. Ooh, that would be bad. If they're telling the truth, great. So which one of those am I going to think about more? The one that, oh, that would be bad. I better think about this and see what I can do.
Right. So does everybody have imposter syndrome to some degree?
Sure.
Or does it even matter what other people are feeling?
It really doesn't. And that's kind of the point, because just like defining why imposter syndrome might be happening to a person. And this isn't, we haven't talked about why a person might have become someone who is likely to experience imposter syndrome, which is a different conversation, right? Like what about a person or their past experiences or their genetic makeup or biology or whatever, what about a person makes it so that they are someone who would experience this more frequently or more intensely is a different conversation. But when someone's experiencing it, it's in those categories we talked about before, right? Well, in order to address it, to whatever extent you are able to address it, it's about either changing your assessment of yourself to match what you think someone is supposed to be in the role that you're in, changing your assessment of the role to match what you are in the role, in that role that you're, what the person's supposed to be doing in that role and who you are in that role. That's pretty much it. You got to bring those two things together. You can change one or both, yourself, the idea of the role, or both, to bring them close together. And there are a finite number of ways to do that. But a big one is to just trust other people, listen to other people when they tell you that you're doing well. So one thing that's going to correlate very highly, I totally forgot your question. What was the question? I'm off on a different thing.
Well, I kind of want to get into the why as well, but my question was, does everybody have it at some point? And does it even matter that other people have it too?
Yeah. So okay, I see where I got. Okay, two different things. So let's do the first one first and then remind me of the second one. Does everyone experience it to some extent? Depending on how you use the term, like everybody is going to experience times where they think they're insufficient, where they think other people are expecting things of them that they're not sure they're going to be able to do. But whether you call that imposter syndrome or just anxiety or fear or nerves or whatever, that's a universal experience. The frequency, the intensity, the impact, like with all these things, those can vary. It's not saying that everyone has the same experience, but everyone has at least some experience. Or I guess I should say, if there's a person who has never in their life and will never in their life ever question whether they're really like capable of something that they are supposed to be doing, Either that person's never stretching themselves, never trying to do something new or different or better than they've ever done before, or they are way overconfident to being problematic. They would never think it would cause so many problems, right? To assume that you can do anything that you think a person like you should be able to do, and anybody, if they think you should be able to do it, you should be able to do it, and never wonder or worry, then you're not going to put the resources in. Like you're not going to, your brain wouldn't then identify, oh, it's worth spending time and energy to make sure I learn how to do this or do it well. You just would, I mean, we, I guess sometimes call that affluenza or whatever, right? Like just whatever I do is the best thing that could have been done. So who cares? I don't think people really exist like that, but if they did, that would not be great.
No. I just want to stop and take a look at some of the comments. Is a nice one has come in here from Coach Fritz. It says, it was eye-opening when my first and greatest mentor told me that he didn't know what he was doing. And maybe more of us need to say that. I don't have a clue what I'm doing. I'm just winging it.
I mean, Marie, I've been supervising and training you as a coach for a while now. You've been coaching for a while now. What's the biggest thing I'm always working with people on? As a coach, you must what?
Well, the way I say it is get out of my own way, get out of my own head.
Yeah, which
trust yourself.
A lot of different trust yourself. I like that. These are all different ways of talking about the same thing, which is putting it out there. Because that's how eventually you defeat imposter syndrome, to whatever extent you are able to defeat it, is you've got to start putting your stuff out there. Be authentic is a way we talk about it. And one way I talk about it all the time is when you don't know the answer, you have to say you don't know the answer.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to do that. Therapists, coaches, experts, teachers, parents, nobody wants to say, I don't know, when they think that they're supposed to know. Like, why in the world, for example, do we think that every single person who has a child should be an expert on parenting?
Right.
Why would someone who's had a child say, I should never need to learn or ask anybody else, or if I ever make a mistake as a parent, oh, I'm terrible. Like, it's a skill set. It's many, many different skill sets depending on how you're looking at it. Why would you expect to? But we do have this thing going around in our culture where everybody hides that stuff. That contributes to the imposter syndrome. Nobody else knows what they're doing either. They just aren't telling you. And if you say, well, why wouldn't they tell me? Well, are you telling them? Or are you terrified that if you tell them, they'll realize you're an imposter?
This was my experience after I was diagnosed with ADHD and started to speak to other adults who were diagnosed late in life as well. And they were sharing their experiences of doing really great in school and in college up until a point where they hit a wall and everything fell apart and they couldn't figure out why. And then the more of these stories you hear, the more you realize that you're not alone and that other people are dealing with the same thing. And it's not necessarily some sort of innate fault in you. It's that maybe the system isn't set up to support you, or you need to ask for more help, or you need to ask for more guidance. But as you say, if we don't talk about it, we don't know.
Yeah. And that's another way we could talk about imposter syndrome, right? Is to say imposter syndrome is the experience of feeling nobody knows how much I'm struggling. And if they did, they would want me gone.
Yeah.
Well, so then I don't show them how much I'm struggling. So then nobody knows how much I'm struggling, right? It's
and I continue to struggle.
Yeah. The whole point of it is to say, I don't want anyone to realize how hard I'm struggling. I don't want to tell them I don't know. I don't want to tell them that it takes me longer than I think they think it takes me, and et cetera, et cetera. So I hide it. And so are they. Mm-hmm. Right? Like when I ask people, because pretty much all my clients sooner or later will say some version of, no matter how old they are, assuming that they're 18 or older, whatever, right? Like, I don't feel like I'm an adult. I feel like I'm supposed to be, and I don't. My clients will be terrified of upcoming birthdays. I should have accomplished so much more by now, and et cetera. And when you say why, right? Like, what is it? Why don't you feel like an adult? Like, what is it that you think an adult is supposed to be that you aren't, supposed to know that you don't, supposed to be able to do that you can't? They'll mostly say something like, I don't know, like, manage their finances and pay their taxes and keep a clean house, stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. For some reason, the tax one comes up almost all the time as part of the list. I don't know why. But everybody says that. Everybody says the same thing. If everyone's supposed to know how to do their taxes, why is the tax preparation industry like a massive industry in the United States? You know,
Yeah.
everyone's supposed to know how to keep a clean house. Why are there house cleaners?
Yeah.
Right.
And decluttering experts. And yeah.
Is this idea that there's some like finite list of knowledge and skills that a person must have. And once you have those things, you are an adult.
Mm.
So they think that the way that they'll end up feeling like an adult is once they've listed out all that stuff and accomplished it all. But that will never happen, because no matter what you put on that list, no matter what you accomplish, you're still going to be aware of other stuff you haven't. So other stuff you don't. You can't know everything. You can't be capable of everything. And cognitive miser, you're going to focus on the stuff that it would be beneficial to you to be able to do or to know that you don't. When you feel like an adult is when you realize nobody else knows what they're doing either.
Yeah.
Everybody's making it up. And that's just what you do. Because what else are you going to do? Predict the future? You think other people are predicting the future and they know exactly how everything will go and they always behave in the way that is necessary to make it so their lives are perfect and they never struggle? Of course not. You know that. We all know that. We just don't think about it that way, because that's not how we talk about it. That's why I always come back to language.
Yeah. Another comment, taxes do feel very adulty.
Yeah.
They do.
I don't know why. I don't know why that's the one. It genuinely fascinates me to think about, like, what is it about taxes and the way that it's presented to people that's become the thing that an adult should know how to do? Or like when people talk about education reform and they're like, we should be teaching kids how to do their taxes. That's practical stuff, not how to do Pythagorean theorem or whatever. Like, why is that the one?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe it's the fear of not doing them wrong and ending up with a big fine.
I suppose that's like, yeah, that makes sense that would be at least part of it, is that it's one of the things that everybody does that could get you in legal trouble.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're worried about legal trouble, most things that have the potential to get you in legal trouble, you can just avoid the risk of, but you have to do your taxes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's also one of those, I think, like self-reinforcing things, you know, like people have said it enough that it becomes identical. It's kind of like, teacher, why do we need to learn how to do math? Because you won't always have a calculator. That's not an answer. Not just because we all have a calculator on our phone now, which we do, obviously. But even if it wasn't the case, even if we didn't all have a calculator on us, so when would I need to do the math? You know, like what is the thing, the situation which might arise, which would necessitate some math that would be easier with a calculator, but is important for me to be able to do anyway? What is that?
Yeah.
And I guess taxes, maybe, I don't know.
Maybe, yeah.
Support each other.
Yeah. You used a phrase there, self-reinforcing. Is imposter syndrome self-reinforcing? If it's, yeah.
1,000,000%. Because imposter syndrome incentivizes a person to either remain isolated or become even more isolated, like we just talked about, to hide their struggles even more. The fundamental belief in imposter syndrome is, I should be different than I am, and therefore it would be bad in some way, embarrassing or potentially dangerous even, to reveal to other people that I am not, that I'm worse than I am or whatever, right? And the only solution to imposter syndrome requires that you interact with other people, specifically that you talk to them about the stuff that you feel like you're an imposter at.
Yeah.
Because if you think you suck, if you think your job is X, you're supposed to be able to do X and you can't, or you can, but it costs you too much or whatever, which is just a version of that's X. You should be able to do it at a certain level of difficulty and whatever. And you're some other thing. Where are you going to get information that suggests that you maybe actually are X, or that maybe actually your understanding that your role is X is incorrect and your role is more of what you are? Other people. It has to be other people.
And you have to get comfortable with asking for help.
Yeah, or desperate enough.
Yeah.
Like the safer you feel, the less desperate you have to be, right?
Yeah.
Honestly, this is true of, I would say, broadly, very broadly, many exceptions, right? And many different ways, even for things that aren't exceptions. This is just one way of talking about it. We could talk about it in other ways, which are also accurate. But I would say that broadly, this is true of pretty much all emotional, social emotional, cognitive, all internal distress. That most of it incentivizes a person to withdraw from other people more. And most of it is made worse the more that someone withdraws from other people.
Yeah.
It's not always made better by engaging with other people more, but it's very rare that it is possible to get better without engaging with other people more.
Yeah.
It's just not how
And yeah, that isolation becomes self-reinforcing too. Because then peopling gets hard, and then you start telling yourself you're bad at peopling.
Yeah, you get imposter syndrome as a person, and which is, like you just said, peopling, like adulting. We turn these things into verbs because people need a way to express that they're bad at it. Why would we have a verb for peopling unless somebody needed to say, I'm bad at peopling? In what other context would it be important to say that?
Right.
We get these ideas, and as with everything, it's rooted in all kinds of different things, or at least impacted by a bunch of different things. But one of those things is the education system, where we split things up by content, and then we create, and then reinforce this idea for people that you're good at some stuff and bad at other stuff, when nobody ever actually defines what that means. What does it mean to be bad at math?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be good at math? What does it mean to be
Shouldn't
bad?
it be more about being interested in it than being good at it?
I think so. And there are many of us who think that, who honestly, like, if you really look at it, the closest thing we have to anything that could verifiably, so bad or good at could be an accurate statement only if you're defining the thing and defining the metric. Meaning, like, I get bad grades in my math class can be an accurate statement. I get low scores on my math tests can be an accurate statement. And it's totally understandable why we could equate someone who experiences those things over and over and over to I am bad at math. But somebody define I'm bad at math in some way that doesn't come back to I get bad scores and bad grades in my math classes.
And it's my fault, and it's something that's wrong with me.
Right. So we can be good or bad at things if we define the thing and the metric we're using to establish what we mean by good or bad. Otherwise, it's this big generic thing that doesn't serve any purpose. So if we're going to talk about being good at something or bad at something generically, there are a lot of people who would say, and I'm one of them, that what we really just mean by that is I enjoy. I'm good at blank just means I enjoy blank. Because over the course of your life, if we're making it generic, well, the more you do a thing, the more knowledge, experience, whatever you have about that thing, the faster you become, the more aware of different detailed versions and ability to interact and adapt. And, you know, in a broad sense, the only way to say that you get better at a thing is reliant on the fact that you do that thing over and over. And what are the things that people are most likely to do over the course of their life disproportionately to how much other people do it is the stuff that they enjoy more than other people enjoy.
Yeah. I think throughout my life where imposter syndrome has kicked in is where I have pursued things because I think I should do them because people have told me I'm good at these things. And when I redirect my attention to stuff I enjoy, or does this make me feel good, or is this something I think I would like to do from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, my experience changes completely and that imposter syndrome starts to melt away. Yeah.
When you ask questions, like one of my favorite, why does that matter? Not to say that it doesn't, but to say, be specific. I'm sure it matters for reasons. Maybe it doesn't, but I'm going to assume if you're acting as though it matters, I'm assuming it does. Just what are the reasons that it matters? Because sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Or sometimes the reason it matters is because of how other people will perceive you, which does matter. That's not nothing wrong with caring about whether other people like you or are disappointed in you or whatever. You don't want to apply it to every single other person always the same. There's people you want to care more about and less about, but it matters. You know, people feel so guilty or silly or whatever for caring about what they care about. Care about what you care about. Just identify it. Doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just is what it is. Anyway, the second part of your question was, does it matter if everybody experiences imposter syndrome? And it doesn't in the sense, like we're just talking about matter, right? Like, does it change your experience of imposter syndrome if other people also experience it? No. If you believe that other people experience it too, that might change your experience of it. But whether or not people actually do doesn't impact just whether you believe they do or not. But in another way of talking about, does it matter? Yeah, because of what we just said. If you think everybody experiences it, then you will experience it differently. If you think you're the only one, you'll experience it differently. And yeah, imposter syndrome in particular is very paradoxical. If I feel like an imposter, but everybody feels like an imposter, that might make me feel even more like an imposter. Everybody has imposter syndrome, so why am I still struggling with this thing so bad? Instead of before it was an answer, I'm struggling with this thing because of imposter syndrome. Oh no, everybody struggles with that? What's wrong with me? But sometimes no. Sometimes it's, yeah, everybody's faking it till they make it.
Mm-hmm. So if we are struggling with something, getting help, that's a big one, right? Mm-hmm. Asking for help. So like in coaching or therapy, this is something that comes up a lot. So how can a coach or therapist help somebody reevaluate their experience of imposter syndrome, but also goals, expectations, things like that? Are there techniques? Are there
different coaches and different therapists will say different things. For me, I'm always focused on what next. What do we do? If you're telling me you experience imposter syndrome, presumably you're telling me that either because you don't like it and therefore don't want to experience it, or want to experience it less or in some different way. Or you're telling me that because there's something else that you don't like, and imposter syndrome is part of your explanation that you've come up with for why you experience this other thing. So we would address those two things differently. Is it the imposter syndrome itself that's the issue, in which case we want to address it? Or is it just part of your explanation for some other thing, in which case let's go address the other thing? Because addressing the imposter syndrome may or may not work, but there also might be other things that could be done to address that other thing that might not be as complicated or whatever.
Yeah.
But really, I don't usually get into like jargony therapy stuff here because it doesn't mean anything to anybody, but I practice an eclectic approach, which just means you pull from all these different theories and they're all named and blah, blah, blah. The one that I pull a lot from is called existential therapy. And particular, there's some Gestalt therapy, which is like a sub branch of it. Something we call the I-thou relationship, meaning you and me here in this moment. That's what's happening. We can talk about anything else, but the experience of it is you and me right here, right now. That if we're talking about how you worry about disappointing people, well, are you worried about disappointing me right now? Right? That we work on it, you and I, because we're the only ones here. And in that case, I think it is very important that a therapist and or a coach be comfortable with their limits.
Yeah.
That they say, I don't know. That they say, this is the best of my understanding, but honestly, as soon as you asked that question, I got real nervous that, oh man, maybe I should have read more books about this thing or something, but I haven't. I've read what I've read, and here's what I think. I don't know. Maybe it's right, maybe it's not. That when we give I don't do giving suggestions, but when we help explore ideas with people of what could theoretically be done, that we clarify constantly over and over. Because you're in a position where you're considered to be an expert, and talk about imposter syndrome. Like, what is a therapist supposed to be an expert in, for example? Because if you ask most therapists, they'll tell you what they feel like is that they're supposed to be an expert in everything.
Yeah.
No matter what a client comes to talk to you about, you're supposed to have the answers and know how to fix their problems, which is obviously impossible and wildly inappropriate. That my job is to tell me about any problem you have. I understand it in a way that you couldn't possibly, and I say, now you do this thing, and that'll work. Because what if it doesn't? Then what? Well, I'm the expert. I was right, and you messed it up. You have all kinds of things. Client resistance is a version of that. Borderline personality disorder, oppositional defiant disorder, and client ambivalence is a psychoanalytic version of that. They say they want to work on this thing, but it doesn't seem like they really do. So obviously the ambivalence is serving some function for it. All these explanations for why the thing that we have said or done that should fix their problem didn't actually, and it's their fault.
Yeah.
And not every therapist obviously takes it that way. Even the ones who use those concepts can use those concepts in ways that are not inappropriate, but this is a version of it, right? Now, I tell people, if you've watched this thing, you've heard me say over and over, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know. I get questions from you, Marie, where I say, I don't know. I have not looked
Yeah.
at any research about that. I don't even know if any research exists, but here's what I'm thinking based on the question. But just remember, I don't know.
Yeah.
When
Yeah, I think it's important to be somebody who models that for a client. So
the
that they
hardest,
can get comfortable with saying, I don't know.
yeah. How are they supposed to feel safe? If a
Yeah.
person is coming to you and they feel like they're supposed to know everything, and saying
Mhm.
I don't know makes them some bad thing, a dummy in their mind, right?
Mhm.
And then you respond by never ever saying I don't know, including when you don't, you still don't say it, you hide it or obfuscate or misredirect or whatever. Well, why would you do that? Except that that means you also believe that if you say you don't know, it means you're not really an expert, and that's bad, and you're a dummy. So you're reinforcing their fear. You're right. Not knowing makes someone a dummy.
Mhm.
You should be afraid of it.
Yeah.
One of the things that's hardest for me, and I do think this relates to like the adulting thing. One of the things that's hardest for me to train people on is, actually, I don't know, I think I've used this exact phrasing with you at some point, Marie, but is they think you're great.
Yeah.
You know how you think everybody else has their crap together, but you don't. They think you have your crap together. So if you do something or say something that you think is indicative of a person who isn't great, it won't change. You're worried it will change their perception of you to being from that you are great to that you're not.
Mhm.
But it won't.
Yeah.
They think you're great. What it will change is their perception of the thing that you've said. That the thing that you've said they thought was something only not great people would say, but here a great person said it, which means, oh, I guess it's not a terrible thing to say. And so they can now say it.
Mhm. So
Doesn't it?
this comes back again to trusting yourself.
Yeah.
And if you're the person who has imposter syndrome, you have to
I mean,
trust yourself.
I know I'm wrong all the time.
Yeah. Same.
What am I supposed to do about that?
Yeah.
The only thing I can do is try my best, be aware of the fact that I'm wrong and limit it all the time, so that if and when it ever causes some problem or somebody notices something and that they tell me, hey, you this is wrong or this would be better or whatever, that I can hear it and say, awesome, thank you, because I know I'm wrong and this will help me make me less wrong some of the time or whatever. Instead of being like, no, I think you're misreading what I said. You're talking blah blah blah, a million different defenses that I could come up with. I know I'm wrong. I want to know what I'm wrong. But if I'm wrong secretly and I don't ever try anything because I'm afraid someone might see that I'm wrong, so I therefore don't do it, and therefore no one can ever see that I'm wrong or I don't know something, well, how are they supposed to give me information I don't have? How am I supposed to learn about it?
Yeah, you're closing yourself up to new opportunities and new information too.
It's one of the worst paradoxes, and it is part of what keeps imposter syndrome going so hard, is the more I care about X, I'll use a common example. I don't want to hurt anybody. I hate the idea that I'm going to hurt somebody. I am always trying to be helpful. This is true of me, but it's also something pretty much all my clients and staff, I
Yeah.
kind of think everybody probably, or hope most people anyway, deal with. I don't want to hurt anybody. Well, guess what? You're gonna,
Mhm.
because no matter what you do, it could cause someone harm. Doesn't matter if it's your intention or not. We know it's not. You don't want to hurt anybody. You're not intending to hurt them, but you're going to do it accidentally anyway. So the question then is, when they tell you that you've hurt them, if you really don't want to hurt people, wouldn't your best response be to say, oh, please explain to me what I did so I can understand it and do it differently in the future? But if I
Right.
really don't want to hurt someone and therefore someone tells me, and then someone tells me I hurt them, I might say, no, you can't. No, it would, if I acknowledge that I hurt someone, I would feel so terrible about it that I can't acknowledge it. I'm going to push back against this thing.
Mhm.
Then it actually makes it so that I don't get better. Meaning, the more I care about not hurting someone, if I let it make me feel that way, the more I keep myself as somebody who is going to hurt someone.
Yeah.
The more I care about doing well in my job, the more I prevent myself from becoming someone who does better in my job. Only if, and this is the key, right? Only if I let that feel so bad that I don't tell anybody what I'm thinking or feeling. So either I can feel bad and talk to people about it, or I can work on changing it so that I can acknowledge that it's different than I want it to be without feeling like utter crap about it, so that I can actually address it and learn and move forward. And so a therapist, coach, or anybody else who's going to help you with this stuff, it's got to be one or both. The things that they're doing have to fit under one or both of those categories. I mean, there's a third of like, they can actually help you learn things you don't know and whatever, but that still requires that you're being honest with them about what your limitations are and whatever.
Now, just have a look at the comments. I think the Invisible Gorilla book calls this The Illusions of Confidence and Knowledge.
Yeah, there's
Gorilla.
I don't know that book. I'm assuming that that's a reference to a very famous, I don't know if you'd call it an optical illusion, but a demonstration of the limits of human perception, where there's a video of like a superimposed video of two different sets of basketball players spinning around in a circle, passing the ball to each other. Some of them are dressed in yellow, some of them are dressed in blue. And you're supposed to count how many times the blue players pass the ball. And then at the end of it, they say, "Did you notice the gorilla?" Because while that's happening, a gorilla walks through the frame and you don't notice it because you're focused. It's something we talk about all the time with that chair thing, right?
Yeah.
But there's a very famous thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Which, again, I haven't read this book, but I'm assuming that's part of what they're referring to with the illusions of confidence and knowledge. The Dunning-Kruger effect, these Dunning and Kruger did a study that showed that basically the less someone knows about a topic, the more confident they are in their knowledge of the topic being accurate. So mostly these days, people just use it as an insult online. Whenever saying that they're confident or knowledgeable, they're saying, that proves that you actually are not knowledgeable, which is not what the Dunning-Kruger effect states. But yeah, another way of saying it is, it's an old joke, like to an expert, everything outside of their field is simple and everything in their field is infinitely complex. And yeah, that's just how it is. Other people's lives are simple. If they only did this or they're doing that wrong. Our life is like, what should I do? The more you know about something, the more detail and granular data you have, the more complex it gets.
My favorite professors at university were always the ones who would say, "I don't know, but I'm going to go find out."
Yeah. Well, this is one of those ways that we reinforce it in the school system, right? If the teacher's supposed to know all the answers and hides it when they don't, the teacher is teaching the children, or the students, I suppose, if they're not children, the teacher is teaching the students that it's embarrassing not to know something and you shouldn't admit it. Our grading policies and structure reinforce that. You do an assignment at the beginning of a semester, you get a bad grade, you learn about the stuff that you would have needed to know in order to get a better grade on that assignment, but that grade still stays the same. We don't replace it now that you've learned some stuff. So are we really incentivizing people to learn?
Right.
Or telling people that they're supposed to know everything in advance?
Yeah. Or if you've ever corrected a teacher on a point of information and they shut you down and they shut down, that doesn't incentivize learning either.
Yeah.
Teachers can be wrong.
There was a very recent study that just the results were published within the last few months, talking about arguing to persuade versus arguing to learn. That if I'm engaging in an argument with somebody where my goal is to disprove their argument and or prove my argument, then my brain, cognitive miser theory, is listening, looking, observing in ways that help me with that. Meaning I notice the things that help me disprove their argument, the flaws in their argument, and I don't notice the flaws in my argument because that doesn't help me. I'm trying to prove my argument. Whereas arguing to learn, which I wouldn't phrase quite that way, but you and I have a difference of opinion. I want to know why you think differently than I think. Maybe you're right. Well, now my brain is incentivized to look for the strengths in your argument and the weaknesses in mine, which means I'm more likely to see the weaknesses in my argument and address them or abandon the argument or whatever. I'm more likely to look for the value in what you're saying and gain valuable information or ideas because of it. And just as like a little side note here, when we're talking about trying to reach out to people, and then I want to see if we can do like a speed run on whatever questions are left. Every major longitudinal study we've ever done on human happiness always comes back the same way. What is the number one predictor of happiness? Not only happiness, but health, longevity, all these things. Is it money? No. That's important. Resources is important, but nope. Is it success in the business world? Is it whatever, blah, blah. It always comes back the same. Good relationships. That's it. Because of course, because that's what makes humans human. That's our advantage, is that we rely on each other. Part of imposter syndrome is I'm comparing other people to myself with the assumption that I should be as good or better than they are at their things, which is arguing to persuade.
Yeah.
It's not helpful to me to say, they're great at this, I'm bad at it, I should be better. I'm not going to then go get them to do that thing, even though I just said they're better than me at it. That just makes me even more afraid to admit to them. What we're supposed to be doing is saying, okay, this is something that I'm not great at, or that I don't enjoy, or that costs me more, blah, 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 blah. And I want to identify, of all the people around me that I have access to, that I could rely on for help, who is best suited and would theoretically be willing to do this thing for me. And what can I do for them in exchange to keep this relationship healthy, so it's not just me feeling like a burden and draining them all the time. We're supposed to be in community. Why in the world are you supposed to be able to do everything on your own? There's never been a time in the history of our species where that was our survival strategy. We're terrible at that. We're worse than like every other animal at that.
Yeah, we're designed to cooperate with one another.
Yeah, which is the most advantageous survival strategy discovered by any organism in the known universe.
Yeah.
And now
I guess designed is the wrong word, that has religious connotations, but built to cooperate with one
over
another.
time, we have become structured in a way that leans on and relies on and feeds into it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
That's what we do. Literally, the best survival strategy by a million miles discovered by any living organism in the known universe. And then we spend our whole lives trying to learn how not to use it. What?
Yeah. We only have 24 hours in a day, and we spend a good chunk of that asleep. So
if being able to survive independently was the measure of a successful person, then what are those tiny little insects that can survive in space or in cryo?
Tardigrades.
Tardigrades. Those would be the most successful people. They don't need anything or anybody. Is that what you want? We don't do it that way.
Yeah.
So that's my pithy, it's not pithy. That's my almost motivational speaker-esque, I guess, kind of response to imposter syndrome is, why would you think you're supposed to do that on your own?
Yeah.
Even if you're right and they think that you should be able to do it, if you can't, wouldn't still the most logical thing to do would be to go to them and say, hey, do you expect me to be able to do this thing? Because I don't know how. If you think I can do it, I need your help, because I don't know.
Right. Yeah. So we need to get comfortable asking for help.
Yeah. And you're not always safe to do that.
Yeah.
To be clear. Some people will respond in ways that are harmful, which is why we don't, and then in cognitive miser, it's better safe than sorry. This person might be great about it, but they might be a jerk. So one of the things about what might turn somebody into being more likely to experience imposter syndrome, just like last week, is somebody who's had more experiences, more negative and harmful experiences that resulted from them being authentic with somebody else about something that they don't know or can't do. If you say that to someone and they hurt you in response, you're going to be a lot less likely to say it to somebody again.
Mm-hmm.
I've
had this experience at university where I've asked people for help with something I didn't understand and needed to be able to do, and getting the response, "Oh, that's easy."
If you have an option, if a person is an optional person in your life, then wouldn't you want to know if they're going to react that way? Right?
Yeah.
Sometimes that's not the case. You're a kid and mom and dad, you're stuck with them. And so if they're that way and you're worried about it, be careful. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But if this is a colleague or a friend or a romantic partner, and you are at a point in a position where you can have them be part of your life or not, wouldn't you want to find out? Tell them, see how they react. If they react like jerks, then move on. And that's not easy. I'm not trying to make it sound like it is. I'm just saying, well, the alternative is, if they were people who were going to respond like that and you don't tell them, either you can never tell them, or you'll tell them at some point later down the line and then find out then that that's how they respond. Either which is better, Except sometimes it is. Context matters. I gotta get going, but can we do like a real quick, like read off what the other questions are and see if I can do like a.
I think we've. How can I work on trusting myself that I'm doing a good job in my life? I guess.
Don't trust yourself. Talk to other people.
Yeah.
You already have been trying to convince yourself it's not working. It's not to say that it never could, but why would you keep trying a strategy that hasn't been working? Talk to other people, get feedback. If you don't trust them, make them use logic to express to you, to prove to you that they're not just, if I say, Marie, you're doing a great job, and you think I'm just being nice, well, then I could say, like, lots of people want to work here. Lots of people want to meet with me. Why would I choose to continue to spend my time with you instead of them if I actually thought you were bad?
Mm-hmm.
Because then it's hard to keep thinking that, right?
Right.
But yeah, use other people. If not, if you don't want to, if you really are going to avoid it, which it is the best strategy, if you're going to avoid it, then you have to be specific. Identify for yourself not only specifically and observably what it is that you think you're supposed to do, but the amount of resources that you think it should take a person to do it. And then measure, do you do it, and how many resources does it take you to do? And see if that changes or improves over time. See if your assessment is correct or not. And lastly, one very common one, especially with people with ADHD, is I do it all the time, but I never remember and never write down how I did it. So even though I know I've done it a million times, if I had to do it again, I don't know how. That can be an imposter syndrome thing. So sometimes it's worth going through and trying to write down what is your process so that you don't have to worry, oh man, I have to figure this out again later.
One last question. But I think we've kind of answered this already. How can parents, caregivers, or educators help young people to manage imposter syndrome? I think it's probably the same answer as for coaching, right?
Yep. Model. Tell them you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Your kids are not going to stop listening to you because you don't know some stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't have to, you can be an authority figure, but you don't have to be an authority on everything, right?
Yeah. Like, just be honest. What are you going to do? Lie to your kids so that they don't realize you don't know something? You say, I don't know. That's an interesting question. Explore it with them. Teach them how to learn by learning. I don't know. Let's look that up together. I don't know. Why do you want to know? Don't get so caught up. In fact, the question itself, we don't have time to go into all this, but the question itself is part of the problem that gets reinforced here over and over. Is any struggle that a child is having is really, I should have, as a parent, been able to predict it and do the things necessary to make them into the kind of person who will never experience that problem, which just makes you feel like an imposter, because that's impossible. Your kids are going to suffer. They're going to struggle. They're going to fail. That sucks, but it's going to happen. I don't like it. I don't want it to be. I'm doing literally everything I can think of to make that not happen, and it's going to happen. If I treat that like that means I'm a failure, then I'm disincentivized from noticing their struggles.
Yeah.
It turns me into that bad therapist who's saying, well, I told you exactly what you needed to do, and you're the one who messed it up, which makes me less helpful to my kids.
Mm-hmm.
I'm limited. I'm wrong. I'm doing my best. I don't know what you're going to need to know 30 years from now. You're probably going to do some job that I can't even imagine what it would be, because it involves things that don't currently exist. Like, I don't know, but I'm doing my best, and I'll still be here 30 years from now if I am, to keep doing my best then. That's what the people in your life need from you.
Mm-hmm.
Not the answer to every question, just the feeling that no matter what they go through, you'll still be there and you'll do your best with them.
Yeah.
They feel
that it's okay to be vulnerable with somebody.
Yeah. Because if they feel that, if no matter what you are struggling with, no matter what you do, no matter what you say, I'm going to be here, then you can tell me you don't know, even if you do think it makes you dumb. So what? You're not worried about being dumb in front of me because I'm not going anywhere. Don't worry about preparing your kids for everything. Worry about making it so that they feel safe with you.
100%.
Yeah. That's the thing you have the most control over. Yeah. All right, I got to go.
Okay. There was one other question, but I think it's probably a good topic on its own, which was, why do individuals set expectations or goals that are way too high? I know that there is definitely a video on goals on our YouTube playlist. So
it's a good thing to talk about.
People check it out, but we could do another episode about goal setting at some point.
Sure. The answers for today in regards to imposter syndrome we already discussed earlier. Either they're inappropriately assessing what is possible for a person or expected, or they're inappropriately assessing themselves. Or sometimes because if you don't do that, even if it is impossible, you're going to get hurt. You know, why does someone set an inappropriate goal? Because your boss said that you have to do that or you're going to get fired. So what are you going to do? Still makes it a bad goal. Sometimes your boss asks you to do stuff that's not possible because they're limited too. Some bosses acknowledge that and adapt, some don't. Anyway, all right. Good to be with you.
And you. And thanks for all your comments in the chat. I'm sorry we couldn't address them all, but yeah, it's been really interesting to get your input. Catch you next week, same time.
Yeah.
Hopefully on time. And yeah, have a great rest of the day, Brandon.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.